Indig with the Project Advantage podcast, here today with Kevin Indig. Kevin has a fantastic background as a SEO and growth advisor, working with brands such as Atlassian, Shopify, Hims, among many other heavy hitters. Kevin, excited to have you today.
Thanks for having me on, Cory. It's always good to see you.
Absolutely. So today we're going to focus on talking about, SEO growth and really how it relates to contractors and distributors, um, facility managers. What we've found on our end, as you know, our company is pretty far along in terms of our own SEO journey, but we think there's a great opportunity for many of our customers to really move the ball forward as well. So, maybe just to start with the basics, SEO is your bread and butter. Why, for the listeners, why do we care? Why do contractors care? Why might facility managers care? What is this going to really do to help them if they haven't even gotten started yet?
I would say the simplest reason to care is that Google receives billions of searches. Google has become synonymous with the web, with how people explore and experience the web, but also with how they navigate a lot of their daily life. I was just thinking about that today, actually. I was driving my daughter to kindergarten, and I was just having this moment of awareness where I realized, oh, okay, like I'm using Google Maps all the time to navigate. And it's just a simple, I mean, it's probably not a simple product, right? But like the simple use case of just navigation that Google has embedded itself into deeply. And so Google has, I think, at least 7 products that have reached over 2 billion users. And so, they're more than just the web. They're now like a part of pretty much everyone's daily life. So that's the one reason. SEO is the art of being visible when people have an purchase intent. And Google is the dominant platform right now where that happens. On the other hand, I don't want to jump ahead too far, but on the other hand, we now have this emergence of LLMs, of AI platforms like ChatGPT, and even they are starting to reach critical mass. ChatGPT now has over 800 million weekly users. That's quite a lot if you think about it. And they're growing at a rapid pace, right? So I would say SEO expands into AI as well. We have many of these massive platforms and applications that have billions of users. And that's where people express an intent to purchase or to buy a service, right? And so it's critical for everyone to think about their Google strategy. And luckily, I'm honored to do this with like really great companies and think about how they should approach it.
Now, for companies that are more national or internationally focused, like many of your customers, like us, and we've worked together in the past, uh, there's it makes a lot of sense because people across the globe, across the country are using Google. But what about, your more regional businesses? I mean, we, every week are talking to many, you know, 10, 15, $20 million businesses that may just have a regional focus. And I know in talking to some people before, there's a concern, is it worth the effort, worth the lift to be thinking about SEO when we're local versus just trying to knock on doors and send out flyers and other more traditional means?
It's a great question because, on the one hand, there is this risk of when everything you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So you have the SEO guys saying, yeah, everybody should care about SEO. Obviously, a little biased, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is that Google is really good at 2 things. One is understanding when you have a so called local intent, meaning when you're actually looking for something in your area. And that can expand into products as well. So if you're looking to buy, say, like lighting, and maybe you specify your location in the city or in the state, that makes it very easy for Google to then say, okay, that user has a local intent, and they will display local products or stores that sell these products. So Google is getting really good and has become really good at understanding when the regional level makes the most sense and when you specify it as user, especially. But I want to just to be fair, say not everybody has to invest in SEO, right? I think broadly, yes, there's a very high chance that your customer is on Google. And yet at the same time, it does not mean that it's the best performing channel for you, right? So I just want to caution that I think everybody should test into SEO, test into the viability and the returns with ample time, but it should not be the thing that if you don't do SEO, you're missing out. That the reality is some companies scale perfectly well on advertising, on direct mail, right? On
Trade
banner
shows.
ad, yeah, exactly, trade shows. So you need to put it into perspective.
Well, it's a interesting comment because I think of two very different discussions I've had over the past 6 months. So one actually was with a company that will do close to 500 million in revenue this year, and their only lead generation channel is trade shows.
Yeah. Wow.
They've been around forever. They've scaled the business over decades, and they just go to trade shows,
Crazy.
and it works. And it's amazing how they've been able to grow, and their team deserves all the praise for it. And then on the other side, I was at a think tank dinner a month or two ago, and the conversation around AI came up. And one of people are giving their responses, what they're trying, what they're testing, and we'll certainly get into some of those different areas. And then we had the person at the far end of the table who, I think there's one now at every table, who says, if you haven't replaced all of your employees yet with AI, you've already lost.
Oof. Yeah. Tough one. I mean, actually, it's a simple one. I don't think that's true. Personally, I have a clear opinion on that. And the thing is, I'm very pro AI. I use AI all the time. I think everybody should use AI all the time. I think I can go as far, but replacing an employee is, I don't think we're there yet. I think that's a bit much butter on the toast. And so look, like, I think even for some of the simplest tasks, you need somebody to have oversight, right? So even big companies that are really bleeding because of AI, say translation services, right? They're not dead yet. So that's one thing. And even the arts and crafts that are most sensitive to AI, say copywriting, they're also not dead yet, right? And so um, a fundamental issue with AI and with using AI for productivity is that you need to be able to judge the output. And if you're not somewhat versed in a certain field, you just don't know if this is good or bad. So imagine you replace a copywriter with AI, and then you cannot really tell if this is good or bad copy. You put it on your website and you see your conversion rates drop. What do you do then? So I think over time, we'll see more professions slowly die out. Maybe not completely, right? But we had this in certain areas. And the reality is, though, that people who understand how to use AI will have a massive advantage over those who are maybe just scratching the surface or maybe shying away from AI altogether. So I don't think we're going to see like people losing their jobs overnight. Maybe if we hit like another massive breakthrough, but it looks more like the opposite right now. Instead, I think we're going to see more people that embody this idea of a 10x engineer, of somebody who is 10 times, maybe 100 times more productive than their peers. And that's going to be a question of how much do you learn about using AI. So I would more agree to that than saying, oh, fire all your people and use AI. I mean, if you want to, go for it, but I'm I'm not going to call that bet.
Yeah, and I think in the industries we work with, the real backbone of the country in many ways, the contractors, facility managers, plumbers, electricians, general contractors, you know, your your Elon Musk of the world developing uh, robots have a long way to go before any of those professions even potentially start to get touched. And so that's a real opportunity to instead look at AI as how can we use it as a tool in our businesses to be more effective for our customers. Really, how do we be more efficient? how do we, give them what they need? How do we have a support line that can be staffed 24/7 because we have a system that's able to answer it and ask real questions in the middle of the night when our on-call, person has gone to bed.
Totally, totally. AI is more of a drill than a whole plumber or a whole carpenter, right? So I think white collar jobs are a bit more, at risk of being disrupted by AI than blue collar jobs, which is fascinating in and of itself. But you're absolutely right. It's much more of a multiplier, of a helpful tool rather than this replacement. And there's this interesting case of Klarna. So Klarna is this payment solution, and the CEO is very, I would say, you know, um, very open to experimentation. And he had announced, I think, a year or two ago that they had. Um, laid off so and so many staff from call centers, and then recently backtracked and said that they hired some of these people back. And so I think that is a perfect example of the fact that AI can do some tasks pretty well. Um, and we're seeing this thing on the horizon where AI continues to um, break through barriers of human knowledge, right? So anything academically, theoretically, AI can already do better than humans. But then when it comes to the application, right, applying that knowledge, whether that is white collar or blue collar, in most cases, it doesn't replace the human yet. And so I think the art and the challenge at the same time here is to be open to AI, to use it and to experiment with it, and yet at the same time not over or undervalue it, which is really easy.
Yeah, I think about a radio ad that I hear almost every morning. There's a local electrician in our area who, works across a couple of states in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, maybe Rhode Island as well. And their ad is basically call us. A real electrician will answer the phone and help you with your problem. And so, it's almost like going, backwards versus forwards. But then on the back end, there could be this electrician who's basically the, business development person answering the call and doing initial troubleshooting, almost like a triage nurse would in healthcare. And then on the back end, you have an AI summary happening, going to the on-call person who's actually going out to the job site. And so instead of them now needing to re-listen to a 15, 20-minute phone call, they can read a, maybe one-page summary of, okay, here's what the problem is. Here was the, overall discussion with the customer. Here's their expectation in terms of when we'll be there. And it really, helps to save time while still giving, the end users and the customers what they want.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think the key is to distinguish between the complexity of certain tasks. And AI can do the low complexity jobs, right? So, for example, I recently had an issue with a water pump in my basement, and it got really ugly because water came into the basement and so on. So I had there was like sirens beeping, water in the basement, a high stress situation. And so I just whipped out, I think it was Claude, and took a picture of the alarms, and I could quickly diagnose the error and at least stop the bleeding. But then, of course, I had to get a plumber to the basement actually several times to come over and fix the issue for me. So there are these type one types of problems, which in customer support would be something like, I forgot my password, that people can use AI for, and maybe even a specialist will outsource to AI. But then again, the more complex tasks, being more hands-on with something, or even just a strategy for a company, I would not give that to AI. I would outsource the simple things. Where even if the answer is somewhat wrong, the risk is not as high. Um, that's I think a good use of the tool belt. But anything more complex, you still want a human to kind of make the right call, interpret the situation, problem solve, etc. And don't get me wrong, I do think that eventually we'll get to a place where AI will be able to do a lot more, especially when embodied in some sort of robot or machine. But I think one thing that we have collectively maybe not agreed upon, but understood, is that that timeline is much further out than we thought. I'm going to be honest, probably in 2024, maybe even beginning of 25, during the hype time of AI, I think we're cooling off of that a little bit. But during the hype time, I was like, man, I don't know where this goes because the models kept getting better and it kept getting better. And I was like, wow, at that rate of progress, uh, what am I going to do in 5 years? I feel much better about that right now, right? So I think we see it on the horizon. It's going to come, but is it going to come in 10 years, 20 years, maybe 50 years? What are going to be the challenges along the path of that? That's going to stretch the timeline.
And I think, one of the really important things is that businesses today can be doing those things to help them show up in these AI models. Maybe there's future events that might happen or developments that change how we do business. But, today, as you were talking about, you had a plumbing issue with your water pump. You went on to cloud, you said, right?
Claude, yeah, yeah, yeah.
To Yep. to troubleshoot that. But the data that gets in there is coming from somewhere.
Yes. And that's where it gets interesting for companies. So diagnosing the issue is just a first step for me, of course. As a second step, I then went to Claude and I said, okay, now you know what the problem is. What do I do to solve it? And Claude said, look, here are 10 plumbers in the area. And it helped me evaluate these businesses. And that's where it's really critical to show up. What is important for everybody listening to this to understand or watching this to understand is that LLMs, and Google is turning into an LLM as well, are incredibly good at understanding rich context. The average length of a prompt, of a query that people type or speak into LLMs is 5 times longer than classic search keywords on Google. So instead of something like, best plumber near me, which people would and still are searching on Google, on ChatGPT or Claude, they might search for something like best plumber near me who can fix a broken water pump that is of the brand blah blah blah, maybe with a certain distance from my home. That is a very typical prompt that people are using. And so, on the other hand, now the question is, okay, how do these LLMs select the right business? And a large part of that is just knowledge. Does the LLM know that you, as a plumber, are able to fix that specific pump? And it will do so either by looking at the web. Is there any information out there that is does not come from the service provider, but also
Maybe
of
a review, Reddit, places like that.
exactly reviews, Reddit, all sorts of user generated content, Yelp, like whatever platform you have, it will
Right.
usually have
Angie's
access.
List.
Angie's List, exactly.
Yeah.
So we look at all these platforms, but then of course also evaluate the service providers list, right? The contractors list. Sorry, website. I mean, not list. And so I think like what I'm seeing over and over, especially in local sorts of businesses where there's a regional aspect or like a proximity aspect, a lot of those companies would do would make a huge jump in visibility if they just provided more information about their services. Here is who we are, here is what we can do, all the different services, the types of brands or companies or material we work with, where we are, like how the process works. That is that is all gold for LMs and often the first step in becoming more visible on them. And as I said, on Google because classic search is also changing rapidly. We're seeing more AI answers at the top of the search. We're seeing Google pushing more visitors into their own LLM AI mode or Gemini. So this is accelerating rapidly, and context is the most important factor when it comes to showing up at all.
And as we've spent time diving into this in our company, one of the things we've certainly found is that writing good content on your website, while there may be some thoughts out there on how to better structure it for LLMs, at the end of the day, we're just trying to write good content for the customers. And if we write good structured content, the LLMs will be able to pick it up. Are there more advanced, next steps beyond that? Absolutely. But I think for, a lot of businesses, even larger businesses that maybe aren't using SEO or LLMs to drive traffic to their business, that's really the first step is as you said, start becoming more robust on what you're actually giving to customers before they pick up the phone. And there's so much research in these technical areas that people want to do.
Absolutely. And you need to be so much more specific. With Google, it was less, or I say, when I say Google, I mean classic search, say before 2024, right? It was so much less of an issue because people understood and learned that most of their searches should be relatively short. Now people understand, oh, wait, the more context I give, the better the answer from the LLM. And they make use of that. We can see that people have, as I mentioned before, right, they prompt much, much longer than a classic search keyword is. And so we have this gap. If you think about a search and the answer as a marketplace, then um, we're now seeing this gap because searches are becoming more complex and longer and richer, the prompts. But on the other hand, there's not specific enough context, right? So meaning the answers can only be so good as what the LLM knows and the content that it gets from the web. And so there's this big, big, big imbalance where companies, again, they need to be much more specific, um, and they need to provide a lot more context. And that's why, for example, we see a lot of help documentation or support documentation doing fairly well in LLMs because that's where all the super specific content lives.
Very interesting. Also, many of those same technical writers who probably originally wrote that content are now feeling a little bit up against the wall because of AI writing, which is becoming more and more prevalent.
100%. 100%. You get into these crazy kind of loops where you want to create more specific content, but humans are a bottleneck, right? So you can use AI to some degree to create more specific content about your services or products. So just very tactically, for example, something that I really like and that I see good results from is to use recorded calls with customers, say on a support hotline, right, or uh, first intake calls or business development calls, and then parsing the transcript for topics. Literally using the transcript of these calls, um, uploading that to something like ChatGPT, and then just seeing what are people actually asking, what are the recurring questions that are coming up. Do we have an answer for that somewhere on our site, or a blog article, or again some form of information that LMs can use? A lot of times the answer is no. So that's a great way to see, okay, like where are we not specific enough? Where do we not provide enough context to then show up in ChatGPT when people are ready to to buy something?
And another great area people could look at doing a very similar action for is both uh, looking at live chats or chats with an agent, uh, pulling those, putting them into a system as well. Separately, going to look at reviews and any what we found is looking at anywhere there's any negative sentiment. If we can then address some of those components ahead of time in the content, or even over with the sales team, just the whole flywheel moves much more smoothly. The customers are happier. They're finding the information earlier in the journey. They're knowing that, UPS takes 3 to 5 days, not the 1 to 2 days that Amazon takes, just because that is what it is. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's so much value that I think any business size can find. I mean, for when we're talking to companies, I would say really fall into two core groups. Probably those that don't do SEO at all yet, and those which either are pretty sophisticated or along the journey somewhere towards, high sophistication. For those just starting out, I mean, are we in an environment where it's too late and they should just double down on what's been working and not worry about it? Or, is there still a strong case for, starting today?
You want to test into it. I think I don't want to say everybody should do SEO, but I want to say that everybody should test into it and see what it does for them. Um, the benefits, and I know we touched on this earlier, is also that it can be like a very low cost acquisition channel, not zero cost, but lower cost than say advertising, which lends itself really well when you need to cut ad budgets, right? So I just wanted to add that point on top of it. But if you're just starting out, as I mentioned before, the question really is what type of content can you add to your site? to make it easier for people to find you. It can be things like service landing pages. Do you have a landing page for all of the services you provide, or maybe all of the products that you sell? Do you create helpful guiding content for your customer base? And it can be very specific guides, right? Like maybe you're selling very complex machinery and you write about maybe the biggest problems with that machine or how it can break and some basic approaches to fix it. Um, Anything that you would expect your audience to search on ChatGPT or search on Google. And if you have some customer research, that is a great place to start. If you're just starting out and you don't yet have a program where your organization talks to some prospects or customers, you probably want to start that and get that going and just get a basic understanding of who are you, what problems are you trying to solve. And start creating content around these problems, right? That is the very, very basic start. Um, you can give away of as much of the solution as you like. But one experience that I have made, not just with my clients, but also personally, is that you can give all of the insights away. People want somebody to help them apply the insights, right? So you can be very, very lavish with the solution part of this, but start with the problems. Be visible there, create landing pages for your products, and then pause and see, okay, what has that done for us? What are we seeing in terms of impressions, maybe clicks, even though traffic is a tricky metric right now, but maybe in terms of customers, are we seeing any leads, any requests, any customers coming through from organic search? That is a great start.
Would you say a good starting point, again, on sort of those more newer entrants who haven't gone too deep into SEO yet, you know, do I want to bring on an agency? Do I want to go to our marketing manager who's doing everything else and tell them it's time to, you know, build 50 landing pages? Do I want to bring in an independent contractor to who has a little more experience? I mean, I feel like it's so hard to figure out what's that right starting point.
It is. I would say for testing when starting out, start with an agency or contractor and make that decision based on your budget. If you feel comfortable carving out a decent chunk, start with an agency. If you need to run lean and mean, start with a contractor and outsource it to begin with. And I'm saying that because I think for a test, hiring somebody full time or maybe several people is a bit much. So you probably want to go to somebody who can do it full service for you, A to Z. But then when you see the returns coming in, if you notice, oh wait, this could actually be an interesting channel for us, then you want to in-house over time because the expertise that people gain is worth a lot. They want to have that historical context. They want to deeply understand the business on a different level than an external provider ever can. But if you're starting out and if you want to test, I think it's a great idea to maybe pay an agency for 3 to 6 months to build out some basic content on your site, maybe some basic reporting, and just see how far that gets you.
And for that, first in-house hire, I mean, what does that person look like? Are you looking for a content person? Are you looking for, a technical SEO person, sort of jack of all trades that's touched a little bit of everything?
Also, depends a bit on your budget. If you have some buffer, then maybe even several people, right? Starting with somebody who's more a jack of all trades, but then also somebody who's strong in content. If you have to choose, I would probably these days go with somebody who's strong in content and has some basic knowledge about the rest as well. But I would model it after what worked based on the partner, what worked in the partnership with the agency or the contractor, right? So if they lean heavily into content, you probably want to hire a content person. If they lean more into technical, the other way around. I think it's most likely that it's going to be a jack of all trades situation. And then after a while, that person will hit bottlenecks, and then they will say, "Look, I can only create so much content. Let's bring in a content person," or I'm getting stuck in my knowledge on this technical issue. Maybe it's time to bring in a technical SEO, maybe somebody for PR, maybe somebody for social, right? The challenging thing is that this classic model and this progression into SEO as a channel is now changing because LLMs are becoming so much more prevalent and important. And the way to influence LLMs is slightly different than classic SEO, right? So when I think about LLMs, for example, I'm much more inclined to hire a social marketer, social media marketer full time than in classic SEO times where that didn't matter at all.
Yeah, and I think as you're looking into agencies, also really understanding like what are they really good at. So are they really good at that social side of SEO? Are they better at content versus more technicals of what pages should we build, not what content should we put on them. Uh, that can become really important too. And I think as you know, our company has over the years worked with agencies. Uh, we worked together on some projects. On the agency side, definitely, there's a sweet spot that each of them have, and they want to offer a very large array of services. And so figuring out early and often what the sweet spot is can really help someone who wants to take that first step.
Yes, absolutely. There are better experiences you can have with contractors, with agencies, with full time hires as well, right? Like with anyone really. But I think you want to look for certain red flags when evaluating an external service provider to help you with this. One of them is, are they making promises on lofty goals? It's unfortunately very difficult to guarantee, say, a position in a search result or a certain number of visibility. You still want to aim for that, don't get me wrong, but a hard guarantee, a promise is a little different. And so that is a first red flag. Um, Second red flag is probably um, if they're overly confident. I think it takes a certain humbleness, and that is a sweet spot in and of itself that is difficult. But somebody who pretends that they know exactly what to do right now with LLMs, oof, probably a little red flag there. Um, and then lastly, um, it's a red flag when people don't outline at least a bit of their process or approach. I think a green flag in that sense would be somebody to come to you and say, look, here is how we're going to, here's what the next maybe 90 days look like. Here's how we're going to start. They don't need to come with a cookie cutter approach, right? They don't need to present you the whole roadmap and everything that they're going to do. But they should give you, right? It's almost like, you go into a Michelin star restaurant and the food is already cooked. That's a little weird. But if they can present you the menu and then, some of the ingredients are prepared, that's probably a really green flag. And you want to think of the same way about SEO agencies. If the meal is already cooked, it's probably something wrong. But if they have a
But
good,
they said they'd get us to position 1 in 4 weeks.
yeah, right, yeah, that's is a deal with the devil. So you want to make that handshake at your own risk. But yeah, the classic promised ranks. That's such a
Yeah, no, and you'll see. I mean, and we see it too on the sales ops side, where we'll get emails from companies. Would you want to? Would you want to schedule a meeting for today if we can promise 30 leads a week?
yeah, must be really good leads then, right? It's
Yeah,
like I get these all
must
the
be
time
really.
myself, and oof.
Yes. Now, so that's the more earlier stage. So then, on the other side, there's in the United States where our core market is a lot of very sophisticated enterprise businesses. Just thinking in the construction space, you have CoWIT, you have CBRE facility management, you have a number of these larger teams that have expanded over the years and do have a good SEO presence already. In today's world of SEO and the LLMs and AI, where similarly to those just starting out, I mean, what would your, suggestion be in terms of, you know, given the state of the world today, where's the focus area really lie?
It is such an interesting question because some of these larger companies, like a CBRE, they have multiple strategies to choose from, right? So I think the larger you get as a company, the more important the strategic angle of all of this. The smaller you are, the more tactical you can be. And so what I mean is, a CBRE, for example, has a list of properties that they might want to make sure shows up in search or shows up in LLMs. That is a distinctly different strategy than, say, shaping the sentiment or the narrative around a company. So, most importantly is to understand what even is your objective, in the context of your strategy and business model. So, do you want to get more people to become aware of your properties? Do you want more people to become aware of your services? What is the angle and what is your objective and how do you make money as a company? Once that's clear, um, a lot of the strategy turns into tactics at scale compared to a smaller company. So you create more content, you optimize more pages, say in the case of the properties, right? You want them to show up. That is a technical SEO problem most of the time. So you operate at more scale there. And typically you also face more organizational challenges, right? Budget approval, alignment strategically, buy-in, hiring, all these sorts of things, approval for certain practices, right? So there's that kind of challenge as well. But on the purely strategic level, what is our goal? Like, what are we even trying to achieve in the sense of how people search and how they find us potentially? Uh, and then what is our lever? Are we creating more content? Do we need a really strong PR division? Do we just need more quote unquote noise on the web, more companies to write about us? Do we need a stronger or affiliate program, or do we need that at all? Right? Does that fit into our business model? So the question of what to do is much more tied to the objective. Whereas if you're a small company or you're just starting out, it's 99% of the time it's just create more content about yourself and what you offer to get started with.
Just run as quickly as you can and
Yes.
and drive the content forward.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
Absolutely. Kevin, what about, also for the more sophisticated companies that, may already have that SEO team in place? As a lot of my focus areas around experimentation in different areas, uh, SEO experimentation. You know, I've heard on one side, from some companies that they're fully there, they're running true randomized trials on SEO. I've heard on the other side that you can't really do it. And in the middle, there's plugins out there that say they'll do it for you. So what is the truth?
The truth is, you can do it, but it's limited to a small number of companies. So, first of all, you need not just a lot of traffic, which is relative, but you need substantial traffic. You also need a substantial amount of pages on your site, right? So, the way that SEO testing works is that you have, I would say this is not a hard line, but I would say like at least 50 pages of the same template that which then allow you to create buckets, right? So then you can say, okay, I have 50 pages. I want to run, say, a test. So I roll this out on 25 pages and I leave the other 25 unchanged, right? That's, I would say, a good start. But the more pages you have and the more traffic, the faster and the more confident are the results. So confidence is a massive thing. You can probably anybody can test anything, but it might take a long time and the confidence in the results might be really, really low. The confidence interval, so to speak. But the faster you are and the bigger you are, the faster you can get to the good insights that you're confident are going to work. And so that leaves a lot of smaller sites or companies, I would say, out. But Meta, one of my former clients, they can test a lot of things, right? They have a lot of pages, they have a lot of traffic, they can detect the smallest signals and understand what the impact is. Whereas another company, they might have to look more at the kind of bigger shots that do a bigger damage, and they might move a bit slower. So it's not impossible. It's just a question of confidence.
Yeah, there's a consumer products company that I was speaking with. I would say in terms of traffic, they're probably top 1,000 in the world. Um, and what they've done on their end is so they'll split out the pages, but they also make sure to normalize out the actual visits, or else you have the sample size mismatch show up and then the data becomes invalid anyways. And so, it definitely if you want the purity of the data, you said it right from the start. There's only so many companies out there that actually have the traffic and have the wherewithal to do it. I think on the other side, to think from an experimental mindset of we want to be testing things is still great. So even for, a company that might not be that sophisticated yet, or, maybe you're a a contractor doing 50 million in revenue and you have a small SEO team that's, trying things out, formalize that experimentation process a little more, build real hypotheses and test to the hypotheses and report to them. And I think, people get very stuck wanting to emulate your super enterprise teams that can just be on that straight and narrow statistical route. But there is also, I would argue, biasly from our position, a good case for trending in that right direction. And I think, so many companies out there can definitely still benefit.
Cory, you're so right. Testing should be the default mindset, right? Anything is a test and everything. And so you're also right in that there is this kind of scientific approach to testing, and then there's a more practical approach to testing. And that is important because, especially right now, as we're starting to learn how LLMs work, and as they're constantly changing, we're trying to catch up. There are a lot of tests you can run that are more on and off tests, like yes or no. For example, LLMs.text. That has gotten a lot of attention. And has made its way, I would say, into like a default recommendation set. And so you can just test that. Create it in LLMs.text, load it to your server, link to it from the robots.txt, see if LLMs crawl it and if they follow it, right? That's a very, very simple test. And there is a whole group or a series of these tests that you can run, like many, many of these tests. And so to your point, right, I think actually a lot of companies that have established SEO teams and processes, they need to go back to a first principles testing mindset where they test more that they thought was established knowledge because it's changing right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been a great conversation, Kevin. For people who are interested in learning more about you and, your advisory group, how do they get in touch? How can they learn more?
Yeah, thanks so much, Cory. Really enjoyed the conversation. If I do my job well, you just go to Google or ChatGPT and ask who is Kevin Indig, or just search for my name. But I publish this weekly free newsletter called Growth Memo. You'll find it on growth-memo.com. And that's pretty much it. Everything else you find on the web or on LinkedIn about me.
As a subscriber to Growth Memo, I will give a plug that the content is really great, regardless if you're just starting out. A good way to sort of tiptoe in and start to learn about some more of these sophisticated topics. If you're already deep into SEO and your company, has a pretty robust understanding of it, also some really sophisticated topics and analyses. And Kev, I know you're big on the research side, and a lot of that comes through in the newsletter as well.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you saying that.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Appreciate it. Thank you.